Hey, you ever thought about going motorcycle racing? That's what people would ask me when I was, riding around on the track. I never really gave it much thought. I always thought I was too slow or racing was too expensive. So this last year, this is the end of 2022. I completed my first year of racing. I got my race license in February. I completed 5 weekends, 18 total races. And I thought I'd just share some experiences about how my first year of racing went, how I enjoyed it, how to prepare for that. Some of the questions, a lot of questions that people asked me before I was racing and during my race season, why race? Why did I choose to race? How do you know if you're proficient enough to go racing? I'll talk about getting race certification, getting your race license, and if you decided to race, how do you know where to race, like where races are? How do you prepare for racing in general? How do you prepare for a race? And I got to talk about a couple other things like how are race days or how is racing different than doing a track day? And what are the plus and minuses of racing or not racing? And then some final thoughts. So why do people want to race? A lot of people, they'll see it on TV. If you've watched motorcycle racing, they see that they want to get involved in it. They're interested in trying it, seeing how it would go. Yeah, some people see racing as a natural progression of their riding. I guess that's probably true in my case. I'll talk about in a minute. Some people actually have ambitions to race professionally. You will actually see not only at track days but at races there are professional racers lined up on the grid occasionally. And racing is also kind of a different way to experience the motorcycle. It's a different motorcycle experience on the track uh, than other than just doing track days. So why did I choose to go racing? Well, I had kind of followed the progression where I had ridden on the street. I got involved in doing track days. I went from being a customer and novice to intermediate to advanced, and eventually I was asked to join staff for Sport Bike Track Time. So for me, definitely getting involved in racing was a natural progression from riding on the street to riding on the track. It was kind of the next step for me. The other thing that was interesting to me is just experiencing the competition of riding and racing against people on similar machinery, all kind of comparable pace. That was appealing to me, and also as an instructor, this is really useful. Like having a race license is really useful to can communicate to customers what the about the racing experience and the ins and outs of it, and really convey things that are not basically in the rule book or you'll find out sooner or later. And then lastly, the why I want to get involved with racing to really improve my lap times. That's one of the pluses and minuses I'll talk about toward the end. So how do you know if you're good enough to go racing? Well, that's kind of a tough question. I mean, probably the primary importance is being able to really hold a line and know your way around the track and not be erratic. I mean, typically, I mean, no matter who you are, with very few people, there's always someone faster than you on the track, and there is quite a bit of close passing, and really have to be able to hold that line and not get spooked and not suddenly swerve into someone. Now, with racing, sometimes that does happen, but you really do need to be in control of the motorcycle. Like I sort of alluded to, sometimes kind of the flip side is that especially when you try to get around people, you have to kind of be offline to get around them. So you have to be familiar enough with the handling of the motorcycle, not only online, but when you're offline as well to try to get around people. And pace is something. It's not 100%. I mean, clearly, if you have great pace and you're consistent and smooth on the track, that's awesome. Um, but what is good enough pace? I guess I would recommend that you go to a site like Speed Hive or look at any of the race results for your local track and knowing your lap time, you could see where the results are for the race finishes, and then you can kind of see where you stand in the pecking order from the race results. And also keep in mind that a lot of races tend to have a single race may have multiple groups racing in it. Like, for example, most races have both expert and novice riders starting at the same time. They're grouped a little bit, but you may have different groups riding on the track altogether. So from looking at race results, you can get an idea of what the winner's race pace is, whoever finishes last, what their race pace is, see where you would think you would fall into that category. But I would certainly recommend that someone who's getting into racing be at least a middle to high intermediate rider, preferably advanced. The typically in racing, it is very close quarters racing. Intermediate in most for most track days, intermediate tends to be a little more chill. People tend to give each other a little bit more space. When you get to advanced, the passing is much closer. The pace is obviously much higher. And so if you've ridden in advance with an organization or expert, as some organizations call it, you kind of are used to that. And so you don't get as thrown off as you would if you just got thrown into the deep end. I guess for me, that was one of the biggest things when I got bumped to advanced is it was some of the passing was very close, and it's just one of these things that you have to get used to. So that's what I would recommend in terms of having what a decent pace would be. I guess I would recommend that you kind of judge yourself honestly in terms of what you think you can accomplish with your race pace and look at the results. And I'll give you a good idea where you could probably stand in terms of overall race finish. Okay, so now if you really do want to go racing, so what do you need to go racing? Essentially, as a new rider, as a new racer, you need a race certification, which then becomes a race license if you've completed enough events. So where do you get this race certification? So certain organizations do offer a race certification class. It's typically a sit-down classroom type instruction with a written test, followed by some on-track riding. Now this is true for some organizations, but I can only speak with Sport Bike Track Time in terms of how their race organization is run in race certification, where typically the instructors will ride with students to make sure that they're not going to be a hazard on the track, not only to themselves, but for other riders as well. There are other organizations that do offer race certification. I believe N2 does. I'm not sure about CCS or ARMA. WIRA does as well. So typically after you complete this race certification, if you've passed the exam and you may or may not have a kind of an on-road type of supervision from an instructor, you get a race certification, you get this piece of paper, and then you present that when you're going to enter a race. They'll give you're designated as a provisional novice, and if you complete with WIRA, I know it's at least 2 events, which are typically 2 weekends. Then you change from provisional novice to just novice. And then they will send you a race license when you've completed your provisional novice. And that's how it works with WIRA. I'm not sure how it works with other organizations. So where do you find these classes, or where do you find these schools to get a race certification? Probably the best thing you can do is pick up a copy of Road Racing World magazine. So in this magazine, they have, if you look through kind of the back, there is a whole listing of different like race schools, like where tracks are. And I guess I would say, so you can go by state. There's a huge listing, like pages and pages of different organizations which are running different track events. So these organizations which show track events, I guess I'd divide them up into about 5 different categories. There's the first one, which an organization, all they do is run track days. All you do is ride on the track. There's no race certification option. And then the second one is organizations that do host track events, but also provide race certifications. The third category that you'll see in that magazine are essentially riding schools, like California Superbike School is a great example, where they really focus on rider development, improving rider skills, but I do not believe they offer like a race certification. Now the fourth one, and these are kind of unicorns, are organizations that are really dedicated to race instruction. I believe Ed Bargy's class is one of those where he really focuses, I mean, it's like an all-day kind of event where he focuses on riding techniques, the physics of riding, and at the end, you take the exam. He provides a race certification if you pass the exam. So that's the fourth option. And then the last option are the different race organizations. For example, WERA, I know they do offer a what they call race school, where you get your race certification prior to entering an event. So for any of those organizations, if you find one which is near you, certainly look on their website, see if there's any indication if they offer race certification. Also with track day organizations and also with race organizations. Look at their website, find a place near you. You may have to dig a little bit on their website. The other thing you can do is also give them a call if someone will actually pick up the phone. Another option is actually talk to someone who you know who does have their race license or does participate in racing. Ask them where they got their race license. Ask them about their experiences, what they went through, all the pluses and minuses. So that kind of leads into how to prepare for racing. So again, the first thing I would do would be, if you want to get involved in racing, is really talk to people who have raced. Talk about their experiences, both the good, ask them both the good and the bad about their race experiences. The second thing I do, if you find an organization which is close to you that hosts races, would be read the rule book. This is the WERA rule book. I've printed it out. Read it cover to cover. This is going to have a lot of the information, more information than I'm going to mention in this video. It's going to talk about all the technical specifications you need for your motorcycle. It's going to talk about the different classes, what classes your bike is eligible to race. It's going to go over things like starting procedure, flags. I mean, there's a lot of information here. How to wire your bike, what the requirements are. So that is really useful to get an understanding of what you need kind of technically to go racing, and a little bit on really how the event is run. Yeah, also included in the rule book, typically, or on their website, should be the costs to go racing. I know with WERA, you need, in addition to just the race costs, you also have to consider the WERA membership, for example. You need an AMA membership. There's other things in terms of track preparation that you may need, like tires, for example. So anyway, a steering damper is certainly something that is needed for racing. And so typically, like a bike just off the showroom floor doesn't require huge modifications to go racing. Typically, it's body work, change the coolant, add a steering damper, and then the technical wiring, which is listed in the rule book, what has to be wired, etc. So the bike does not have to be, super tuned to go racing. It can be, I mean, there's different classes, as well, I guess, again, with WERA, stock and superbike, where stock has very limited modifications to the bike, but superbike, the modifications you're allowed to make they're much more extensive, what you're allowed to do. I mean, for example, this bike here, basically I ran this bike with basically OEM suspension. It had been dyno tuned, and that's about it. I mean, obviously it has steering damper and wiring, but I mean, it's pretty decent. I mean, it was a decent enough bike to get around and be competitive with racing last year. So another thing to do in terms of if you want to participate or prepare for racing is to really put some seat time in and work on your lines, work on getting your pace, work on getting around people when you can, because things happen a lot. They say things in terms of pace on how things go. Things happen a lot quicker from going from intermediate to advanced and going from advanced to racing, that's certainly true as well. Another thing you could do to prepare for a race is really watch videos and see how it goes with racing. See what people times are. See how they ride. It may be eye opening to some people. It may be old hat to some people. That's how maybe they normally ride. But at least it makes you aware on how the race goes, how many people are involved in different races. It's really worthwhile. Another thing you can do to prepare for racing is really get in shape. Racing can be very tiring, especially if you want to enter an endurance race. That is a lot of seat time. I mean, you may be on track for half hour straight before you have a break. Even the sprint races, typically they're not so physically demanding. You do have to be in shape, and it really depends also on how many races you enter. I know people who enter 4 or 5 races a day, and that's a lot of time also. So you have to be prepared and have that stamina, endurance, so that you're not so fatigued at the end of the day. The last thing you want to do is enter a race and be so tired you start making mistakes. And obviously when mistakes start happening, then bad things happen. But typically for me, I would enter like 2 races a week, 2 races a day, so 4 races per weekend. And so physically, it wasn't so physically taxing, but it's definitely mentally taxing. You're really hyper focused on that race, and really like every lap you're trying to put in the maximum. So I mean, and I'll talk about some of the differences between track days and racing, but you were so focused, and it goes by fast. It goes by so fast that not only in terms of the pace, but from when the green flag drops to the checkered flag, I mean, that race goes by. You'll be over before you know it. And it's just that whole 10 minutes, you are just so hyper focused on what's going on the track. It'll be over before you know it. So in terms of preparing for an individual race, I would recommend that you get as much done as you can before race day in terms of all the bike prep. Know where everything is. Print out the schedule. Print out any forms you need. Fill out as much as you can beforehand. Get all that done get as much done as you can beforehand. The last thing you want to do is be screwing around with the bike for some technical snafu on race day. You're gonna have so much other stuff on your mind. Make sure everything is done. Tires. If you need new tires, try to get all that stuff done ahead of time. The less you have to worry about on the day of the race, the better, and the clearer your mind is going to be, and the more you'll be able to focus on your race and kind of enjoy the race also. Yeah, the other thing in terms of preparing for a race is really just kind of relax. For me, I was really nervous my first race. It was kind of crazy. I almost went off. I actually did go off the track just a little bit, but I was in the wrong gear. The most of the race, I was just really nervous, but then I kind of settled in, and really after I did that, the race really came to me, and it was a lot more enjoyable after the first 3 laps. I mean, the other thing in terms of racing, like the day of the race and when you're doing the race, is it's going to improve your lap time, but don't expect it to knock 10 seconds off your lap time. It's easy to get caught up in that kind of red mist. You see someone going by a lot faster. Ideally, you want someone who's just a little bit faster than you, so you can kind of tag on the back of them and get a tow from them, or try to catch up with them and pass them. You're not going to catch up with someone who's doing 10 seconds a lap faster than you. I mean, if you try that, that's really not going to end. So certainly, the day of the race, enjoy yourself, but ride within your limits. As I say with everyone, I mean, it's just as an instructor, really, you have to ride within your limits. Now, you push your limits more than you would on a track day, but you can't push so far beyond your limit you lose control of the motorcycle. Okay, so how is racing different from doing a track day? Well, there's certainly some similarities, and then there's obviously some differences. So, like with a track day, you have registration. Typically, for a track day, you have to sign up ahead of time, especially for a popular event, and it may get sold out since there's limits on the number of people. So typically, you register beforehand, but then you go through registration, get your sticker, you get the bike teched, and then it's this very structured every hour, however many sessions they have, you go out and ride, and then you have a lunch break. So with racing, that's a little bit different. They typically, at least with WERA, again, I can only speak to WERA. I've only raced. That's the only organization I've raced with. Is that you can walk up literally the day of the race and register with WERA. Fill out all the paperwork, fill out the number of races you want to enter, you register, and then you go through tech. Now, tech is they have registration tech, and then first practice can be like 8:30 in the morning. So it does go by pretty quickly. So typically, like two practice sessions. They have a riders meeting at lunchtime, and then the races go bang, 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 and they go in order from 1 through whatever 15 or whatever number of races they have. So you're not really the races don't go by the clock like they do during a track day. So you have to be very aware. Like if you're race number 5 and race number 3 is going, you just better start preparing, at least mentally. Make sure everything. Do any final last minute checks on the motorcycle to make sure the bike's ready to roll. Again, with racing, that can definitely be more exhausting. For endurance racing, it'd certainly be more exhausting physically. I find it's more exhausting mentally, as I'd mentioned before, in racing as opposed to track days. Track days tend to be a little more chill, a little more structured. In some ways, racing is also different, where you have some downtime between races, and you can talk to people, watch some races, etc. But then when it's go time, it's go time. Not like a track day, where track day, if you're not feeling it, or maybe when you eat breakfast, you can roll out whenever you want, or roll out to the grid, mid-session. It's not that way with racing. It's like when they say, third call group, race number 4, you're going, and that's how it is. You do your warm-up lap, and one of the other big things with racing is really the start. There's not you don't get to practice that during track days. Track days, you're going past start finish, and you know what gear you're in, you know what speed you're going, you know your reference points in terms of going into turn 1. The race starts are a different animal, where you're basically going from a dead stop at start finish into turn 1, and you're also doing that with however many number of bikes are on the grid. Or that really takes a little bit to kind of get used to that. It's still something I'm still learning in terms of not only getting a decent start, but maneuvering through the throng of bike going to turn 1. Another thing which is much different than doing a track day is really the level of aggression of riders out there on the track. This is a competitive event. I mean, track days they can be competitive, but a lot of people are really some people are working on improving the riding. I think everyone is really. Some people really just enjoy riding on the track. Obviously, with a race, it's a competitive event, and people are fighting for every square inch of pavement. So there's very close passing. I've seen passes in races which would be pretty much unacceptable in a track day. But it's racing. I mean, that's how it is, and that's something that you really have to get used to. Not only as on the receiving side, but it's something you kind of have to work on to try to get around people. Sometimes you do have to really make an aggressive pass to get around people. Obviously, no one wants to get hit, no one wants to crash, but there is certainly a higher level of aggression and close passing in racing that you typically do not see during a track day. Like I mentioned, another thing with racing, like if you're in a race, typically the bikes are competitive, machinery. They're all kind of similar. So that is also different from track days, where if you're riding a 400 and you're just getting blown away on the straights by an R1, but if you're in a race where it's all 400s, then the playing field is a little bit more level, and that really makes it more enjoyable in terms of racing. I find it is racing with people on supposedly competitive machinery. Now, as I mentioned, so a lot of races, there's multiple races in one race. Typically, any race will have a novice and expert group all going at the same time, unless the field is so big for that particular class. Sometimes they'll split it into two races. But most of the time, it is really novices and experts going out at the same time. Experts go out first, followed by the novices. So you may see, so you may end up getting passed by someone you may end up getting lapped by an expert if you're starting out with novice racing. Then there's other races where, like the senior race, for example, which is one of the ones I race in, where there's actually four races within one race. There's expert heavyweights, expert middleweights, expert, I'm sorry, novice heavyweights and novice middleweights. So there's really four races going on at the same time: novices, experts, middleweight, and heavyweight. But the scoring is all within class, so that's you really just have to kind of focus on like kind of who's in your group, who's racing in your class, and that's all you really need to worry about. But you can get caught up in some of those other riders on the track as well. So what are some of the pros and cons with racing? I mean, it is really enjoyable to compete on the track with kind of your peers, people on similar machinery, supposedly similar capabilities, and there's a wide range of talent. But if you can get with people, or if you can get caught up in a race with people who are kind of along your similar skill level, that really does make it enjoyable. And races do tend to kind of filter out at the end. Everyone starts on the grid, everyone goes into the turn one, all as a group. But as the race progresses, people naturally, you know, the field naturally divides itself up by pace. And so in general, you after at least a couple laps, you will be racing with people kind of in your skill set. And then you can, when you get with those people and you're racing against them, that really does make it enjoyable. I really do kind of like that. One of the other things is that racing definitely kind of forces you to push your bike beyond and your abilities beyond what you would at a track day. It's really hard to describe that. And this is the thing where they say racing makes you faster. I mean, this is definitely true. Probably at the three tracks I rode last year, it's at least a second and a half per lap that I cut off my personal best at each one of those tracks, and it's hard to duplicate as well. Like at one track, I went back after I raced there. I had set my PB. I went a couple weeks later. I went back to that same track, just doing a track day, and it was difficult to do that. It was difficult to replicate that because I mean, racing again, it's like so hyper focused that it really does push you to kind of push your maximum. Let's say, so for example, like you ride at the track and you're kind of pushing it, maybe you're riding it in like 90% of your ability. Let's just say, I mean, me personally, I always kind of keep a little bit of margin in there for unexpected things. Now at racing, you're really up closer to, let's say 95%. You're really pushing your abilities and the bike to a higher level. And that does translate into faster lap times. And when you're doing this, when you're kind of pushing the bike a little bit harder than you normally do, kind of a very short period of time, you're really understanding the bike and how it operates and what you can do even at a little higher level. So it's all part of learning. So it's all part of the learning experience in terms of understanding bike mechanics and physics and how it works. And then certainly, if you do end up winning a race, especially a close race, something that where you really had to work to cross that finish line first, I mean, that is really thrilling. I mean, I know there are some people that really get emotional about it, and I can understand that. There's been a couple races I've had where I felt like, hell yeah, I did that, and I really felt it was just phenomenal. I mean, talk about adrenaline dump. It's really rewarding from that point. So kind of some of the downsides. I mean, it can be more expensive than doing a track day. I mean, it's kind of comparable in terms of the prices, but you're doing stuff like maybe you're buying tires more frequently, and the number of laps that you're getting per dollar is certainly lower than doing a track day. So keep that in mind. Kind of in terms of the Mentioned the aggression before. I mean, there are certainly some aggressive passing. I do know people, other riders, other racers who I've talked to, they're caught up in incidents that where people are trying to push things beyond their skill set. They've ended up taking people, and no one wants to do that. Obviously, not only you wreck your bike or you scratch up your bike, but you don't certainly don't want to take anyone else out and cause them injury as well. Typically, there's maybe a little bit more risk in racing as opposed to doing a track day, and why I say that is I guess again people are pushing their limits, pushing the riding higher than they would at a track day. But typically, racers are a little more skilled, a little more familiar with how they ride, and the consequences could be the same. I mean, people could get really screwed up doing a track day. I've seen that happen, and they could also get severely injured, during a race as well. So I guess the overall, my opinion is that the racing is a little bit more risky than doing a track day, but it's not three times or anything like that. I think it's a little bit more risky. And then in terms of there's really no cash benefit to racing. It's really a net loss. I'm not going to talk about sponsorships. I really don't know how that works. The limited thing I do know is that maybe if you do get a sponsor, I don't know how you get a sponsor. They may cut you a better deal on parts or something like that, or they may buy you a set of tires. Typically, since we're talking about club racing, as you get along in your club racing, and maybe if you start winning more consistently and entering professional races, maybe sponsors come a little bit more. But we're talking about really just going from track or street riding to into racing. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion if you're a veteran racer. Like I don't even know how you do that in terms of getting sponsorships. But at the end of the day, there's just for us, average racers, there's no cash prizes or anything at the end of the day. It's really the benefit is really the satisfaction of entering or completing a race, possibly winning, improving your riding skill. That's the real benefit. There's no monetary compensation for a lot of races to do that. I believe there are some race organizations they do offer some cash incentive for winning. I have no idea what that is. Weird does not. So that's the only thing I can speak to. So kind of some final thoughts that in terms of looking at racing, like if it's right for you and where you want to do it, I would certainly talk to someone who has raced and has some race experience. The other thing you can do is like go to a race with them. Like if they are racing, come along with them. Give them a hand. I mean, I don't know anyone who would turn down help at a track day or at a race. Again, and when you're racing, you're so focused on things that any help you get is typically. And someone wants to change a tire, or put warmers on, or put your bike on the stand. It would be very beneficial for them, and then you get to see how the race goes. Like follow them around, go all the way from registration to tech, everything, how the race goes. The only thing you wouldn't be doing would be riding a bike. So I would certainly recommend that if you want to get involved in racing, again, attend with a friend, help them out, see how it goes with the race. And then if you're still interested in racing, look up those organizations on their website. A lot of times they'll have forums to discuss different aspects of racing. It'll answer a lot of your questions. It'll give you some insight in terms of how the day is run. Look for different race schools, race certification organizations. Just do some research. And after you've done all the research, after you've talked to people, if you still come to a decision where you feel like racing, I would say go for it. Life is short, and it is. I think it's rewarding. It's not for everyone. It's certainly for some people. I know some people who have raced like one weekend say it's not for me. But again, you never really know till you try it. So hopefully this is all kind of useful information for anyone who's thinking about getting involved in racing.